Galoma ones. Hi, Galoma. You were nice. That should be the book. There's that one. There's one bigger one, so you probably do use the top one. Alright, let's go to Darklands. Top screen up. Greetings, it's I, Tantus Narragagico, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today we're continuing the Golarion Gazetteer. I've never pronounced that word correctly. Can't make me, can't stop me, can't woke me. But anyway, our tour through Golarion, as we've been doing for a lot of places, visiting countries and stuff. And this is a very much more unique one, because I've visited regions before, but usually they're regions that almost have like a distinct border. This does not. I thought for this month we've been doing them, for October, I'm going to talk about the Darklands. So the Darklands are equivalent to, if you've played D&D, D&D 5e, or anything else like that, the Underdark. This is traditionally a much more Faerun thing, but appears in a lot of various D&D worlds as an underground area of civilization and stuff. Golarion, Pathfinder, has its own unique version of it, the Darklands, which are quite different in a lot of ways, but there's similarities between the two that you're never going to have it. Look, one day I'll get Gazetteer. That's close enough. Anyway, we're going to dive into Darklands today. We're going to talk about it. It's a little bit spooky. It's a little bit dark. There's a lot of honestly terrible and evil things down in the darkness that stalk you in the night. So, I mean, that's why we're talking about it. And certainly there are some things that are evolving over age. I think I've talked about this a little bit with the incoming second printing revised version of Pathfinder that's breaking away from the old D&D stuff a little bit more. It does mean some lore and places are changing. And what this means for Drow, I don't know yet. So take everything Drow I'm talking about today with a grain of salt, that you can still use it if you want, or update it to whatever changes come in the future. I might do a specific episode talking about the Drow when they either cease to exist or changed, to talk about the two versions of them. But that's a future video. For now, though, into the Darklands we go. Down, down, deep into the earth. And we're going to talk about the books you can use and reference. And there are a couple good ones. Into the Darklands from 1st edition. The Darklands Revisited, also from 1st edition. Heroes of the Darklands. And for some things that are a little bit more general information that includes some stuff about the Darklands, but it's not as major of a book, you can also see the campaign settings. And the Lost Omens World Guide from 2nd edition does include some information on the Darklands. So this is our tour of books from the Darklands. If the first 3 are going to be specifically Darklands related, the last 2 will include Darklands in a kind of general world view, kind of. And I would say for your most up-to-date little bits of information, the World Guide from 2nd edition is your best bet. Here's the symbol of the Darklands. So it's caverns, vaults, passages beneath the surface of Golarion's continents. Entrances can be found throughout the world. It is still, even with that, uncommon for surface dwellers to venture into the unsafe depths. It's a world unto itself. There is no single capital, no single ruler. It's scattered dictatorships, kingdoms, theocracies. It's an area that is inhabited by a lot of horrible creatures. It's sort of like, if you think about the surface of Golarion, most areas are either tamed or gained under control, and there is organized people to basically keep dangerous creatures or beings in check. There's nothing like that now. The people and beings down in the Darklands protect themselves. So, we can talk about basically the Darklands and how they work. There's three distinct areas that, as you go farther down, you go into the different layers. Each one has their own characteristics, inhabitants, and hazards. But we'll talk a little bit after we talk about them, entrances and some other areas. So, the uppermost of the three regions is Narvoth. It's basically the wilderness of the Darklands. Surface explorers that come to the Darklands tend to be familiar with this region. Its cave networks connected by lengthy tunnels, and for it to be part of Narvoth, it has to be connected to the layer below, which I'm going to try to get this name, Sekamaina. They give pronunciations for these layers. That's very nice of them. When they give me things to pronounce, I can learn them. Sekamiya. So it has to be connected to Sekamiya below. And the Narvoth cavern systems aren't necessarily continuous. So you might have to travel into Sekamiya to get to another cave area, or to the surface, to travel between them. Some areas of Narvoth, such as Ragori and Garund, are isolated from the rest of the Darklands. There's a bunch of interesting things inhabiting it, but we are going to dive a little deeper into Narvoth. I could probably make videos about each of these layers separately, and maybe I will in the future, but I'll try to give some information about it. So, if we talk about Narvoth, that tends to go to about 2,000 feet below the surface. And, again, that's pretty deep down. It was heavily affected, this region, to give a little bit of history of Narvoth, by Earthfall. The upheaval, the giant chunks of rock hitting the side, there were cave system collapses, a lot inhabited by orcs and dwarfs that had been there since immemorial. Dwarfs saw that a time to have their quest for the sky. If you want to look up, read up, if you want to watch, I've done videos on both orcs and dwarfs, you can see. But, effectively, orcs and dwarfs were natives to Narvoth. So some dwarf brethren have stayed behind in their underground cities, not giving up their ancestral homes. These dwarfs became the Duergar. Most orc tribes and dwarfs abandoned their ancient caverns. So troglodytes, veggie pygmies, dark fae, have all infested those caverns as they were left off. Some humans did the same, fleeing the devastation of the surface. Exposure down here, substances packs with dark powers have changed them into mongrel men, Morlocks, and the dark folk. So the humans that fled here from Earthfall are all changed too. The Darrow had always existed down here, but did take advantage of the power vacuum left by dwarves and orcs. So those are the kind of main inhabitants. Though you can also find Zulafs, Kagalins, are also a couple more, but the Duergar and Darrow tend to be the two big creatures. In Narvoth, they tend to be isolated, tribal, small groups. There are some more civilized groups, Duergar, mongrel men, troglodytes, vegetated Darrows, have larger numbers of systems and caves connecting them. They do sometimes raid the surfaces, and a lot of the largest cities in Narvoth are actually located beneath major surface population centers. The Duergar city of Felstock is near the orc capital of Urgir, and the Darrow conclave of Korginbjur is located beneath the Taldan port of Casimir. And there are also a fair amount of species found both here and on the surface: dwarfs, orcs, goblins, trolls. Darrow are insane blue-spin humanoids, dwell under major surface cities, steal people for bizarre sadistic experiments. Duergar, as I said, are the dwarfs that stayed underground, but they've been twisted by their hardships and toils, and they serve the evil dwarven deity of Doskar, and they claim to have been abandoned by their cousins who quested for the sky, and are actually some of the most ardent slavers in all of Narvoth. You get troglodytes here, another one. They are one of the most numerous inhabitants, but they have infighting, no social cohesion. They're not really a threat. They fight amongst each other, but can be mercenaries. And of course, veggie pygmies, as I mentioned, are plant-like humanoids that were created recently by spore crafters of the Drow House of Ordinor. They grew out of control and fled and have become here. There's a lot of locations and places of interest I could mention in Narvoth, but again, maybe if I do another video on that. Second layer. Below Narvoth is, as I called it before, Sekamina. It's the largest of all the realms in Darklands. Its vast underground warren of tunnels that span the continents, along with great underground rivers and lakes. Most entrances here require traveling to Narvoth first, but there are some exceptions that will take you directly to it. The regions below the Inner Sea were the site of the Serpent Folk Empire during the Age of Serpents, but now is the domain of Drow. Again, that could change. It could be back to being Serpent Folk. The Drow could be completely gone. We don't know what's going on with them. That's a discussion for another time. Anyway, let's talk about Sekamina a little bit more. It is more well-known than the deepest layers, Orv, the last layer. So, again, though the surface, Narvoth, is the most likely the most people know about, there are information about Sekamina. This goes down from about 2,000 feet to about 8,000 feet below the surface. So an exception to going down to Sekamina instead of going through Narvoth would be Mobid Le, which is a area near the Shuanti areas of the Kodar Mountains and the Storval Plateau in Verisi. That goes straight down. So, Narvoth, a lot of narrow tunnels. Sekamina is large, major tunnels that run underneath the continents of the vastity of Gurun, controlled by the major races of the layer. This is the only way that has the warring species cooperate, basically controlling these tunnels. It extends past the inner sea regions. Some go as far as TNZ, or up to the crown of the world. So this is an area that spreads very vastly. The greatest denizens in the current times are, of course, Drow. It used to be the Serpent Folk that settled these regions. It's the former servants of I'm going to butcher this, the Serpent Folk deity of Yerderseus. Give me a pronunciation. Thank you. So, the former servants of Yerderseus had withdrawn because of their war with the Aslan. Aslan drew them underground to these underground cities. They hibernated for several millennia. Others began to inhabit this territory. Drow settled here prior to Earthfall, basically remaining on Golarion rather than traveling to Vorian with the apocalypse coming. So a lot of destruction was spared when Starstone fell here because it was so deep underground. Unlike Narvoth, which had a lot of it. During the Age of Darkness, other races inhabited here. Ghouls from the surface established an undead civilization of Nermit, Northuria, near the area of Osirian and Thuvia, with necromantic ore called Lazarite nearby to them. Gugs were brought to Golarion by the Rough Beast, basically by Rovgug. The aquatic race of Scum were freed from the servitude of the Ogolthios, basically the Aboleths, and breaking free from their masters' undersea civilizations, coming to sunken cities, underground lakes, and the oceans of Sekamina. There are oceans down here. The Segalage migrated up from Orzhov, and the Svirfneblin first established themselves in this layer in the Darklands. And even some Aslanti humans came here over the millennia, becoming Morlocks, fleeing the destruction of their homelands. So a lot of people moved in here. So, if we would talk about, it is the most occupied and technically civilized of all the layers. Basically, in Narvoth above, there's these caverns where they inhabit, separated by wilderness between them. Hundreds of miles of wilderness. Hard to navigate passageways. And down in Orv, there's these larger kind of vault territories that are almost their own ecosystem. This place has wilderness too, but the great civilizations of this layer, the Drow, Sverfenblin, ghouls, have hundreds of thousands of inhabited chambers connected by large, well-controlled tunnels. The Drow have the largest empire in the Inner Sea region, from Avastia in Varisia to the west, to Ramirzin in the east, from under the World Wound to the north, and under Chelix and Adorn to the south. Cities are places of near anarchy, controlled by matriarchal 12 great noble houses, with cruelty, decadence, and violence. The intelligent and cultured ghouls that dwell in the cities of Nermet and Nokia are found beneath a barrier wall between Syrian and Thuvia. They're ruled by priests of the demonic patron of Kabiri, and trade in slaves with human nations above. The scum I called them for a second, have large underground body of salt water called Lake Nir Mathin, near the Inner Sea. They tend to be smaller communities, but have tribal groups and have places like the Temple of Ulat Kini and the caves of Cold Manumbo in their possession. The Sverfenblin are deep gnomes, which are exiles from the First World. They settled here to keep a close watch on the Fae of the Court of the Ether at Narvoth above, and they are partially blamed for Gnome's exile. Unlike a lot of Darkland races, they're actually friendly towards outsiders. They are protective of their settlements, which make them virtually unknown to other inhabitants of Sekamainen. So basically, they are... If you are an outsider, you might be able to deal with them, but you probably can't get to their settlements. You probably can make deals with them and maybe like passage through their territory or something like that. Especially if you are friendly. If you aren't, well... So there are some other minor groups that live here that you might run into. Driders, which are flesh warp drow, upper bodies of drow, lower bodies of spiders. Gugs, fur-covered giants that come from the dream dimension, pulled in here from the Robogug, the imprisoned god, deep below. Morlocks, the descendants of Aslanti humans that are more feral in this place. Ropers, thought mindless, they are quite intelligent, and have an advanced cultured center around the least destructive element of Robogug's beliefs, pain and cruelty. So they do worship Robogug, but they're like, we're less destructive. Pain and cruelty. The serpent folk, these that fled here during the war with Aslan and Edge of Legends, still are here. Most are dormant in magical sleep in the ancient city of Severgeni. There are others that chose to remain awake, remain behind and not sleep. They lost their skill in magic and became more feral and savage. So there are still some serpent folk there, but most of them are asleep. So maybe that's going to be the storyline. They wake up and change things. And there's also worm-like Suguathi, or basically horrible, evil Neothilids that dwell originally from Orv and come to the surface. But let's talk about Orv. Now you're deep down. The most dangerous area. As I said, it has these immense caverns known as vaults, which host a wide variety of underground oceans, jungles, artificial suns, entire nations of warmongering humanoids, mountain ranges, deserts underground. Basically, if you are from one of the upper layers of the Darklands, you would consider the vaults with the same sense of fear and wonder that the surface would do for them. And even those that live there don't go there unless they're the bravest, craziest kind of things. So yeah. It's mysterious, more isolated, and these are enchanted chambers, the Orvidian vaults. So there's magic to them too. And they have their own, not only these own environments, they have their own masters each. And they are the legacy of the vault builders, which we're going to talk about too. So, the thing is though, when you have a vault, it does tend to represent a single biome. It's just a desert, a jungle, a forest, an underground sea, a mountain range. And there's just so much legend that even amongst all the other places of Darklands, it is legendary. So, it's believed that the vaults in Orv were constructed by an ancient, extinct race known as the Vault Keepers, seemingly extinct. They left little traces of who or what they were behind, other than the vaults themselves. Their construction, mystery, maybe an experiment, but they require powerful magic, and these are extensive underground areas. And they have enchantments that protect them from destructive temperature, pressure, and seismic activity. And a lot of this magical protection extends to the regions above, explaining some of the protections that areas of the Darklands above have. But it does seem the enchantments are ebbing away, and some vaults have collapsed. The inhabitants of Orv are not as diverse as other areas of the Darklands. Inhabitants there have a home vault they seldom travel from. The exceptions are their Inhabitants, who are trying to expand their territory. Most interactions between denizens of this particular vault are in the tunnels between the vaults. It's believed that the inhabitants of these vaults are descendants of servants who once served the Vault Keepers. Basically, were left there on their own. You would have to look into each vault themselves to kind of get an eye of them, but I'll mention the ones that are talked about a little bit here. Ones that basically are known about by name and information provided. There's the Black Desert, a Poison Desert by Blightburn, the Crystal Womb, a Crystal Jungle, Deep Turglyph, a Lost World, Dene Brum, Domain of the Neolids, Dogadeleth, home of the Urfidin Empire, Irviandin, City of the Intellect Devourers, Land of the Blackbud, named after the aromatic substance Black Blood, Midnight Mountains, Mountainous Crossroads, Minos Shat, sacred to the Urfidens, and the Sightless Sea, largest of the known vaults. Vaults are also known to exist in the Darklands of TNZ, which we'll talk about in a minute, a little bit more on their own, but they tend to be more mysterious, poorly explored than those under Bastia Grud. They speak of Malformed Giants, Portals of the Abyss, Seas of Living Oil, Hearts of the Dark Tapestry, so yeah. So, there are a lot of entrances to the Darklands. I would recommend if you could look them up, check out the books and things like that, or use things like the Pathfinder Wikipedia to get a list of the entrances to the Darklands, but there are a bunch of them just to talk about because you do have to enter into them. Most of these places are a simple natural or artificial cave that connects to the Darklands, as long as you delve deep into them, into the greater tunnel systems of Narvath or Sekimine. Entrances from things like the Dwarven Sky Citadels, the infamous Pit of Gozug, are entrances there, but there are less obvious ones. Those are the ones that are kind of like, oh, yeah, this exists. So, the Darklands of TNZ. We should talk about it just a little bit, because it is a thing that exists, though we don't have a lot of information Probably we'll get a bunch of it in the KNZ book that's still not out yet at the time of streaming and recording this episode. I have to talk about it on its own. It has 3 layers. Narvoth, Seka, Mine, Orvov, just like its counterpart on the other half of the world. There are entrances across the length of TNZ. 3 that are particularly active are the Ghost Path, the Clicking Caverns, and the Elven City of Abaddonio. Upper reaches of TNZ are very similar to where they anywhere else about it. Mycenoids are some of the words there. There's rumored to be a nation of hobgoblins mirroring Kowlin on the surface. So those are kind of things there. In Sekimine, there's a lot of places there. There's an Oni city, place of cave giants, troglodytes, Hars of Plateau of Lang, some rat folk, other various creatures there. Underworld dragons are said to there here, and of course the Orv portals I talked about. So, I mean, like, they don't have major populations of Duergar, Drow, or Darrow in the KNZ things, so they have other inhabitants there. Those beings didn't spread this far. So that's why you have to think about there isn't a large major populations in these areas a lot of times. At least particularly the same ones you'd see. Yeah. Anyway. So, we know that the Darklands are ancient. Probably the most ancient region in Golarion for reasons. And other than the history of the Vault Keepers, the creation of Orv, there isn't a lot known about the history of this entire thing. You know, we know beings head down there, but Darklands history is just so mysterious. Unfortunately. And I could... But it doesn't mean that you couldn't look into it and, you know, find out information. Certainly the dwarfs might have some ancient history, and a lot of the major beings that are down there, investigating things like serpent folk, caverns, and stuff like that, communicating with those in Sekimine, if you could do it peacefully, which is not impossible. Improbable, but not impossible. You certainly could find ways of getting information. So, travel, though. It's dangerous, it's time-consuming. There's a lot of belligerent, intelligent creatures that are here, and inhabitants that are here. But again, the chambers and complex tunnels just make it difficult. You have to think a bit like Orv. There are tunnels between them, but a lot of times, you know, it's mostly giant caverns that you're kind of have to navigate going between these things. And there's always cave-ins, pits, impassable obstacles that you could run into, the twisting, cavernous nature of it. It's not like walking from point A to point B, and where you can get a better understanding of natural barriers, and see those natural barriers a lot easier. You could take a tunnel and run into a natural barrier, and you wouldn't have known about it until you're right in front of it. So, traveling and, you know, Darklands is very hard to do. Now, I have talked about the majority of creatures and inhabitants of the Darklands while I was talking about either things. But the thing is, in comparison to there are some intelligence, there are some civilized, there's a lot of creatures that are bestial, savage, primal living. So as much as you have those civilizations I talked about a lot about, the kind of semi-civilized races and stuff like that, there are so many creatures that are down there, beyond them. So it's just keep that in mind. But there's also a lot of hazards you would increase down there, because it's dangerous beyond just that. Food is scarce. That's a big one. Yeah. So food scarcity is a big problem. There's not as many creatures living down there. So competition, especially in some of the upper caverns and places where you don't have it. There are regions where there are food chains, where food is a little bit better. But those areas also tend to be the most deadly because a lot of things are pushed into that one area for these food chains. Much more than, so, the caverns and stuff where that, so it's sort of like any area there's food becomes a competition. So deadly predators, scavengers, ambushers, there are other things there too. So, the air. While most air is safe to breathe, maybe a little stale, areas blocked off by tunnel collapses or water, or near sources of noxious gas, become dangerous to travelers. Near magma flows can be caustic. Poisonous gases can lead to a quick demise that can form in areas. So, breathing down there is not a necessity. You do not know if you're always going to do that. Plants do not have a chance of surviving down in the caverns. Most don't. But it's not just water or light. Things in Orvidian vaults, there's an exception. For them to live. It's those that live here rely on fungus, molds, and slimes for substance, and they're the basic low totem pole things. And if you do encounter plants, they're very dangerous. For fungi, you can still have the rot-inducing violet fungus, the animating slaver funguses, brain-damaging, celistids, twilight mushrooms. Molds include brown molds and russet molds, those which give birth to veggie pigmites, poisonous yellow molds, life-draining ghost molds, and the harmful slimes can be like corrosive green slimes or innocuous seeming olive slimes. So it's sort of like you're very low end of the trading flow. You don't actually have plants very much. Again, exceptions. But a lot of times you have these fungus, slimes, and molds which find their way scavenging on the little nutrients they can find and become the bottom of food chains. There are also some strange creatures that I can mention a few of them. Because as much as there are the monster-type creatures, there are a lot of just general animal-type things. Sturge hounds. Which are kind of like sturges. Ether frogs. And ghost bats. Just mentioning these aren't really like... It's meant mentioning those as an example of smaller creatures that are probably not going to be dangerous, but existing. So you do have a food chain. But again, even amongst these small creatures, there are very dangerous things that start building up from them. And so, breathing, anything that's alive, in general, from the flora to the fauna, is a danger in the Darklands. But I think that's a good enough basic tour of the Darklands. I think that kind of hits up most of the information on it that I wanted to go over. As I said, there are components of this that might be their own videos, kind of things like talking about the specific beings, their cities and places like that, whether you have these kind of civilizations. Certainly in Second Mind, there are relative civilizations, or going over a number of vaults and kind of going into depths about them if they have information about them might be something to do in the future. But I wanted to go over the general idea of the Darklands and how it is a very unexplored place. Certainly, under Avasti and the nearby areas of Casmern and Rund, we know a lot more about the Darklands when we're there, and a lot more of the inhabitants there. But there are a lot of other continents in the world, and the Darklands are technically everywhere. The vaults are everywhere. And these deep civilizations, these places beyond the darkness, into the depths, they're very interesting. And of course, there's always the constant beat of Rovagog, deep within the core. His influence is everywhere. Or its influence, I should say. And so, certainly, when you're deep down in the deep dark, that influence is a lot stronger. So there's all these kind of factors that make the Darklands a very interesting, though very dangerous place to explore. Certainly, plenty of fun adventures to have there. But not one that particularly would be easy. And, you can always be a group of Darklands creatures, having a Darklands adventure. That's always a possibility for a game. But I think that's enough, though, and we might revisit parts of Darklands in the future. I hope it's enough that we learned. So, anyway, we'll leave it there. If you are checking out stuff that I do in other places or here, I do things on both Twitch and YouTube. These videos are streamed live and put up on YouTube later on. If you are joining me for live the streams, hey, these are for tabletop related stuff. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Pathfinder tends to be Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, late afternoon. Saturdays, late morning. If you're looking for all other content that I do some live shows and games. I do discussing tabletop at Tabletop Discussion Show with friends every Saturday evening. I do gaming streams, usually Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. If you're looking on YouTube, which after a couple of days, these go up live on YouTube after, well, not live, but they go up on YouTube after they've been recorded. And, that's all my tabletop-related content. So if you're checking out one or the other, check out the other is what I kind of mean. So if you're joining me on Twitch or follows, at least good enough. That's at least I asked for. Joining me on YouTube, subscription, liking the video, leaving a comment. Have you done any adventures in the Darklands? I should ask that at the beginning. Have you done any adventures related to the Darklands? In any kind of way, whether playing a character from there, having a full adventure there, traveling there with a group of surface dwellers. I'm just curious. That's the question for you. And ring the bell for if you're already a subscriber to get notifications about when videos are going live and stuff like that. My social media, so I have a Discord linked in both places and a Twitter.com. Where it uses updates on my schedule, what's going on, and things like that. Most of the time. And sometimes some basic thought patterns and stuff like that. Other little bits of information. That's where to connect up with me. Yeah. I think that's all. I think that's all the shout-outs. I try to remember them all. I don't always remember them all. I try to get the schedule. Don't always remember them all. I'm good that way. But I thank you for joining today. More Pathfinder stuff in the future. More other tabletop-related stuff in the future. Hope you enjoyed this kind of basic tour, introduction to the Darklands, and learned a little bit more. But until the next time we chat, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.